The sun filtered through the thin curtains of Dr. Roberto's office, casting a gentle glow that seemed almost to mock its intensity. Alice sat stiffly in the cushioned chair, her light blue skirt wrapping around her legs as her hands gripped the fabric, betraying the turmoil she felt inside. The room, usually a place of hope and dreams for many couples, felt like a cage to her. Dr. Roberto, a middle-aged man with a kind but somber expression, cleared his throat. "I'm sorry, Alice and Joao," he began, his voice firm yet measured. "The test results are conclusive." He paused, glancing at the papers in front of him as if they could somehow soften the blow. "It seems the issues preventing conception are related exclusively to Alice's fertility levels." Alice's heart sank with every clinical word that escaped Dr. Roberto's lips. She had known this moment might come, had even feared it, but the reality was far more crushing than she had imagined. It's one thing to anticipate bad news, it's another to hear it confirmed. Joao, seated beside her, clenched his jaw, his face a mask of stoic acceptance as the doctor began explaining the details. Terms like endometrial complications and ovarian insufficiency caused Joao to simply nod, his hand resting initially on Alice's arm in a silent promise of support. Alice couldn't bring herself to look at him, afraid to see guilt or disappointment in his eyes, though he had never given her any reason to expect that. Instead, she kept her gaze downcast, her vision blurring with unshed tears. "And while there are options available, such as fertility treatments or IVF, I must be honest about their invasiveness and cost," Dr. Roberto continued, his tone gentle. "These paths can be physically and emotionally demanding and often offer no guarantees." Alice felt Joao's gaze on her, gentle and questioning, but she wasn't ready to face him. She was trapped in a whirlwind of self-punishment, her mind replaying every moment that had led to this point. How could she face Joao knowing she was the reason their shared dream of having a family was crumbling? Joao had to help her up and lead her to the car. It was only after she settled into the passenger seat that Joao cleared his throat and finally spoke to her. "Did you hear the doctor?" Alice blinked. "I tuned out after he said it was my fault." "He didn't say it was your fault," Joao replied, but his tone made it seem like he did blame her. She said nothing, choosing instead to shrink into herself as much as possible, her eyes remaining fixed on the window. The silence between them was thick and tense, so palpable it could have been cut with a knife. This felt like the final nail in the coffin. Everything was fine until it wasn't. It had started long before they tried to have children, only to be disappointed when, each month, her period arrived. When the car finally stopped, Alice looked out the window. They were home now and she sighed in relief. Not a single word had been spoken between them. Alice wanted to say something but didn't know what could possibly improve the situation. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when things were good between them, something Alice wished was still the case. Before meeting Joao, Alice spent most of her time focused on work. She wanted children and a husband, but the right time hadn't come yet. Most of her days were spent at the publishing house she inherited from her father. He had built the business from the ground up, and as an only child, it was expected that Alice would take over. She had essentially been groomed for the role from a young age, and when he retired, Alice willingly stepped into her duties. It was a little daunting, but Alice did her best to prove that even though she had inherited the position, she deserved it. Over time, the people who worked for the company began to respect her as much as they had respected her father. She hadn't expected to meet someone, but one day she bumped into Joao. It was the typical romantic comedy scenario, bumping into someone while grabbing coffee. At first, Alice told Joao she wasn't interested because she wanted to focus on her work, but Joao persisted. He said he didn't mind taking things slow or just being friends as long as she was in his life. That was all that mattered to him. It's safe to say he eventually won Alice over. She tried not to fall too quickly, but no man had ever made her feel this way before. He made it seem like Alice was the only woman in the world, there was no one else. After pushing him away, Alice decided to take a chance and accept a date with him. She made sure he understood it was just one date. João simply nodded, smiling confidently as if he knew she'd want to go out with him again, and he was right. Before Alice knew it, she was falling in love with João. There was no turning back after that. They got married, and for a few years everything was great. It's hard to pinpoint when things began to go downhill, maybe after the honeymoon phase started to fade. She didn't know what it was, but she felt something was missing between her and João. As the marriage progressed, the news that they couldn't have a child together was just the latest blow in a storm of problems that kept hitting them day after day, week after week. After the doctor's news, things improved a bit, but there was still an awkwardness that Alice didn't know how to resolve. She was lost trying to figure out what she could do. In the end, Alice decided to plan a romantic cruise for the two of them. They hadn't taken a vacation in a long time. The last time they went on vacation was about a year ago. They went to Hawaii and it was nice, but it was interrupted by an emergency at João's work. However, this time, they would be on a cruise ship and it wouldn't be easy to just go back home. Alice bit her lower lip as she looked at all the available cruises. She hoped to find the perfect one. It needed to scream romance because they were both desperately in need of it. The cruise she chose was a princess cruise that started in Florida and passed through several Caribbean islands. They had gone to a Caribbean island on their honeymoon, which had been an amazing experience. Alice almost felt the need to dig out the photo album. There were dozens and dozens of pictures highlighting a happier time, she and João playing on the beach, holding each other, looking into each other's eyes as if they were deeply in love. One day they were. Alice wondered what had happened. She didn't want to give up on their marriage, it was important to try and hold on, not to divorce unless they could say they had done everything to save it. Alice's parents didn't bother to hold on, her mother simply divorced her father, leaving them behind. But Alice didn't want to do that until she had tried everything. Surprising her husband with a cruise would be tricky, but she knew he had plenty of vacation time at work. It wouldn't be hard for him to take 2 weeks off or more. The same applied to her as the boss. Alice could take as much time off as she wanted without needing to log the time, so to speak. As soon as Alice finished purchasing the cruise tickets, she smiled to herself. A few weeks later, she told João about the cruise, but his reaction wasn't what she had expected. "You bought tickets for a cruise without consulting me?" Alice flinched. "I thought it would be romantic." "Oh well, you went to the trouble of buying the tickets, so I guess we'll go." He didn't seem very excited, but Alice ignored it. She had made the mistake of not telling him, so that was on her. "I'll make sure to consult you next time," she said, apologizing and trying her best to force a smile. Alice didn't want to make a big deal about his reaction or show how upset she was. That could make João defensive. The next day João changed his mind. He seemed much happier than the day before, and Alice had no idea what had changed in him, but she felt like she had her old husband back. Then everything seemed to fall apart all at once. It happened accidentally. Alice was preparing dinner for her husband and in-laws when she realized she had left one of the grocery bags in the car. So she went to get it. As she crossed the garage, she heard whispers coming from the side of the garage near the yard. Alice frowned as she realized it was her in-laws talking about her. To make matters worse, João was there with them. "It was a mistake marrying that woman," muttered Patricia, Alice's mother-in-law. "I thought marrying into such a successful family would help elevate you and our family. But what's the point if she can't carry on the family name?" Alice's heart sank. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. They were insinuating, no, they were outright stating, that João only married her for her reputation and money. "Your mother's right," João's father, Carlos, murmured. "If you stay married to her, it'll only ruin you. What you need is to marry someone younger who can give you a child, not stay with a woman who can't." Alice held back her tears but didn't move. She wanted to hear more. More than that, she needed to hear it to open her eyes. It was necessary to hear these 3 people talking about her. Before, Alice thought her in-laws liked her, at least to some degree. That image was shattered. I already have someone in mind. Her name is Louisa. She's crazy about me and can't wait to take the next step. That name belonged to a colleague of Joao's, and the first time Alice saw her, she was struck by how young and beautiful she was. Of course, he would have an affair with her. You can't divorce her, Joao. She'll take all the money and leave us destitute. Joao growled, Mom, do you think I'm stupid? I don't plan on divorcing her, so don't worry. This cruise we're going on is the perfect opportunity for my barren wife to have an accident. It was the best gift she could have given us. Alice backed away, unable to hear any more. Her husband, the man she thought loved her, wanted her dead. He wanted to get rid of her and use that money to sail off into the sunset with that young woman he was having an affair with. Alice didn't know how she would get through this dinner with a neutral expression. Honestly, she didn't think she could. Returning inside, Alice turned off the stove. She texted Joao saying there was a sudden emergency at work and that they could order food from anywhere they wanted on her. That would surely please them. Her car was parked in front, so she rushed to it and got inside. Joao responded to the message asking if everything was okay. She had to force herself to just send a smiley face and a thumbs up. Before Alice could go home, she needed to pull herself together, otherwise she would break down and accuse Joao of something, which could cause him to react violently and hurt her before he planned to. There was no proof, just Alice's word against his. She wished she had recorded the conversation, but she had been in shock, and all she could do was stand there and listen as her world crumbled around her. It didn't feel real. Alice pinched her cheek to see if she was dreaming, and the pain assured her she was not. For a while all she could do was drive aimlessly. She couldn't go back home, but she also didn't want to go to the office and be seen by anyone still there in her current state. It made sense now. Joao would rather kill her than divorce her. He would get all the money and the business she inherited from her father. But if he divorced her, he'd be left with nothing. Why would he opt for divorce when he could simply get rid of her? The prenuptial agreement specified that what was hers remained hers, and what was his remained his. Her father had told her many times before the wedding that a prenuptial agreement was necessary if she ever got married. Alice decided to make it clear that anyone who married her would have to sign one. If they didn't, there would be no marriage. Joao didn't seem upset when he signed the agreement, but was it all an act? She no longer knew what was real and what was just a facade. Deciding to book a cruise had been the worst decision she ever made. It gave Joao the perfect opportunity to take her life. All he needed to do was say she fell overboard. It would make things so easy for him. Under no circumstances would Alice let him get away with this. The more she drove, the angrier she became. She blamed herself for not being able to give Joao a biological child while he was cheating on her behind her back. Not only had he been unfaithful, but he was also planning her murder with his parents. Yes, it terrified her, but Alice was more angry and determined than ever to ensure Joao would never see another cent of her money. This marriage was about to end, but it would be on her terms. However, how she would do that was still a mystery. As the sun began to set, Alice finally drove back home. Her in-laws had already left, and she heard Joao in his office, probably doing nothing, just playing video games as usual. Joao, I'm home, Alice called, trying to act as normally as possible. Joao didn't respond. She sighed and texted him, and he didn't even ask if something was wrong, he just replied, okay. The thought of sleeping next to him that night terrified her, but Alice had to pretend everything was fine. If she didn't, he might snap and try to hurt her. That night, as Alice prepared for bed slowly, she kept looking at her reflection in the mirror, torn between crying and calling herself an idiot. How had she gotten involved with this man without ever realizing something was wrong? This was why Alice had always felt there was something strange about their marriage. After the rose-colored glasses were removed, Alice sensed that something was off but could never identify what it was until now. Did he ever truly love her? Probably not. To João, she was likely just an easy way to access millions of dollars without having to work for it. Yes, he had a job and they kept their finances separate, but Alice never had a problem giving João money. He was her husband after all. Saying the word husband filled her with a bitter feeling. She frowned at her reflection in the mirror, resisting the urge to punch it. The blue-eyed woman with long, wavy brown hair staring back at her looked tired of the farce of this marriage and of trying to make something work that was beyond saving. Alice needed to control herself. Getting angry with herself wouldn't help, it would only drive her deeper into madness. She lay down on the bed, but sleep wouldn't come. It was as if João wasn't even planning to come upstairs that night and would end up falling asleep playing video games in his office. That's what he usually did when she found him there after dinner. Normally, Alice would go to his office and try to convince him to come to bed, but now that was the last thing she wanted to do. She wanted him as far away from her as possible. It was the only way to ensure she lived to see another day. What could she do? Alice was still struggling to figure out her next move. Her father's legacy would never go to João, that was something she would make sure of no matter what it took. The next day Alice finally figured out what she needed to do. She had to get some sleep, but the moment she opened her eyes, an idea struck her. The first step was to take back all the properties and items she had put in João's name and transfer them back to herself. They were originally hers, so she could do that. Next, she needed to visit her lawyer, who was on retainer, to start the divorce process. The only thing Alice planned to let João keep was the house itself. She had bought it outright after they were married, and to be honest, she didn't want anything to do with it. It would only remind her of this farce of a marriage. She arrived at the courthouse early, and when she stopped by her lawyer's office, Bianca seemed shocked to see her walk in, sit down, and ask for a divorce. "I can't believe what I'm hearing," Bianca said. Alice raised an eyebrow. "Why is it so hard to believe I want a divorce?" "I just thought it would never happen," Bianca replied. "What do you mean?" Alice asked. Bianca wasn't just her lawyer but also her friend, a good friend who always spoke the truth. "Well, usually." Now Alice had the feeling Bianca wasn't telling her everything or hadn't told her something before. "I never liked João, as you know," Bianca confessed. "But I passionately hate him, Alice. He was never good enough for you, but he made you so happy that I didn't want to take that away from you." Alice smiled bitterly. "Oh well, he's been cheating on me, so I decided it's time to leave. That's why I want to start the divorce process." Bianca smiled. "You have no idea how happy that makes me, Alice. I wish you had told me about João sooner." "Would you have listened?" Alice bit her lower lip. "I like to think I would have, but I was so blinded by love that I probably wouldn't have. I might have pushed you away." "That's why I didn't say anything," Bianca admitted. "I didn't want you to push me away. I needed to stay in your life somehow so that when things went wrong, I'd be there to help." Alice sniffled. "Bianca, you don't know how much it means to hear that." "Thank you." It was comforting to remember that there were still people in the world who cared. After discovering that her husband wanted to kill her, Alice desperately needed something to hold on to, some assurance that there was still good in the world. But as comforting as it was to know she had a true friend in Bianca, Alice realized she needed to take more drastic action. She had to disappear. Alice decided to leave without speaking to João. She would leave him and her in-laws a video message explaining her actions. Let him be with the woman he was cheating on her with. The mere thought of João now left her numb. Alice no longer felt the deep love she once believed she had for him. Hearing that conversation made the illusion disappear. She now understood that what they had wasn't a marriage, it was a farce. She wished she had realized this long before now, but what was done was done. Leaving without telling anyone where she was going was the best thing she could do now, it would ensure her safety. As she left Bianca's office, Alice knew it was time to set things in motion. She set up her phone and pressed the record button. Hello, João, Patricia, and Carlos. I'm leaving this message for all of you to let you know that I'm leaving. João, this marriage is over. I know you're cheating on me, so go ahead and be with that woman, in fact, a child, since she's half your age. If you try to drag out the divorce, so be it. But you won't get anything. I've already transferred all the properties back to my name. Feel free to keep the house as it's filled with nothing but lies. The video was recorded in a single take. Alice had practiced beforehand trying to think of the best way to convey her message. It was delivered in a cold and calm tone. She wanted João to think she wasn't hurting, that she was strong. Inside, she felt like she was rotting, but that would only be temporary. Alice was determined to move on with her life somehow and leave João behind in her metaphorical rearview mirror. With the message recorded, Alice went to her office. She walked into the second-in-command's office, where Beatriz looked confused, as Alice usually didn't come in on that day. Alice, is everything all right? Alice smiled. I'm getting a divorce and need to leave for a while. So for now the business is in your hands. I'm just a phone call, text, or email away, but the day-to-day operations will be managed by you. Beatriz's eyes widened. I don't know what to say. Say you'll do it, Alice teased. Yeah, of course I'll do it, Beatriz quickly responded. But wait, did you say you're getting a divorce? Yes, and I don't want to discuss it any further. Please respect that. Beatriz nodded. Yeah, of course. I'll keep you updated weekly since you probably won't be completely detached. True, Alice said, smiling faintly. But largely Beatriz would be in charge, and Alice was okay with that. She sent the message to João and her in-laws later that day. Alice then checked into a hotel, blocking their numbers. If João wanted to contact her, he would have to do so through her lawyer, who would then relay the message to her. There was no way they could keep in touch anyway. The hotel was only temporary. Alice just needed to stay there until she figured out her next steps. It was hard to say what she wanted to do. Her life had been planned out until now, but with the divorce from João, she needed a new plan. A few days later, Alice finally realized what she wanted to do. She would buy a house in the middle of nowhere, renovate it, and live there. To some, this might seem like a sudden decision, but it wasn't. When Alice's father was falling ill, he told her about a dream he had. He wanted to retire to a farm in the countryside and just enjoy the rest of his days in peace. But he passed away before he had the chance to pursue this retirement dream. Now, as a favor to her father, Alice felt she should do this, but it would also be for herself. She wanted to be in a place where no one knew her, a place where she could heal. That was all Alice wanted to do with her life in the near future. She searched and searched until she found the perfect abandoned farmhouse about 2 hours away. It was practically in the middle of nowhere, with the nearest neighbor a 10-minute walk away. The house, at least from the photos, had seen better days, but Alice didn't care. There was enough money to renovate it and turn it into something incredible. Alice began renovating the building and the farm itself, hiring a construction company to start the work. It took a few more days before she could go there because she wanted to ensure there was enough space to sleep. It would be her first visit to the place in person, and her stomach churned with excitement and nervousness. She was still perplexed by the end of her marriage and the fact that it ended so cruelly. How had she not realized it before? These thoughts continued to haunt her. Alice couldn't find solace, not even in sleep. Nightmares tormented her, making her wake up drenched in sweat. It was terrifying to think that her husband could have killed her. This was where her dreams usually led. Of course, he would be happy to finally get the money he wanted so much. That was why Alice was trying to leave the city. She needed to get out, and that was what she was doing today. Today, Alice's belongings were being taken to the farm while she waited for the driver to arrive. The driver who showed up was someone she had hired a few times before, but they had never spoken much. After racking her brain, Alice remembered his name was Lucas. When he arrived and stopped at the corner, he smiled at her. Hello, ma'am. Just Alice, she interrupted, not wanting to hear the last name of her soon-to-be ex-husband. It would only be a reminder of what she was trying to leave behind. Well, I'm Lucas. I know, Alice replied with a smile. You've driven me to work a few times. You usually drive some of the other executives. The man smiled back. He had beautiful blue eyes that drew her in, with curly blonde hair that she wanted to run her fingers through. Lucas seemed to be about her age, not that it mattered. She shouldn't be thinking about that now, he was just a nice man hired to be her driver. So you bought a farm? Lucas asked as they hit the road. Alice smiled. I wanted to escape the city, and that seemed like the best way to do it. I live near the farm you bought, Lucas admitted with a smile. Her eyes widened. Really? Yes, I live on my grandmother's farm. Ironically, you bought a farm just a few minutes from her house. How long has that farm been for sale? A long time. It's good to see someone finally bought it. I'm looking forward to seeing what you'll do with the place. I passed by earlier and it looks like it's coming along well. There's still a lot of work to be done, Alice pointed out with a gentle smile. She leaned her head against the car window and began to doze off. Alice had been running on empty for a while now. All she could think about was putting as much distance as possible between herself and her husband, João. Bianca had forwarded some of the messages João and her in-laws had sent to her. Some were normal, while others were disturbing. João couldn't understand why she wanted to divorce him like this and didn't even want to talk about it. The audacity of that man was insane. She couldn't believe he was trying to pretend that nothing was wrong when she knew he was cheating on her. Alice was careful not to mention anything about their apparent murder plan. There would be an unmarked car at the farm at all times. She had hired a security company to watch over her and ensure nothing happened while she was at the farm. This was just to make sure nothing happened to Alice. She didn't believe anything would happen, but it didn't hurt to be cautious. And nothing like renovating a place, Lucas said nostalgically. Alice chuckled. Those were exactly my thoughts. It was a long drive, so Alice had little to do but talk to Lucas. She didn't mind, he was a very nice man as she discovered, and she wished they had talked more before. He mentioned that he had served in the military, something he did right after high school. Alice admired that at such a young age, regardless of his reasons, he enlisted to fight for his country if needed. But a few years ago Lucas was injured in combat. Alice noticed that he didn't elaborate much on the subject. It must still be difficult for him to talk about, which she understood. There were things she didn't like to talk about either. After being honorably discharged, Lucas moved in with his grandmother. She was getting older and needed help anyway, so it made sense for him to live with her. But to help pay the bills, he also got a job as a driver for the company Alice hired to take her and other employees around. When they arrived at the house, Alice blinked. They had arrived faster than she thought. We're here. What do you think? Alice couldn't help but smile when she saw the state of the house. It was still a mess, but the mess seemed to be starting to organize itself. It's starting to look like a home, she said. He laughed. Exactly what I thought. She began to open the car door, but Lucas made a loud noise, surprising her. Let me do it. Lucas, it's fine. Alice, it's my job. Let me do it, he said firmly but also kindly. Alice sighed, deciding to heed his request this time. Lucas insisted on accompanying her to the house and carrying her bags inside. She turned to him, giving him a soft smile. Thank you, Lucas. If you need anything, I'm just a short distance away. There will be a car here tomorrow, so you won't need me to take you, but that doesn't mean I can't help in other ways. She didn't know why, but the way he smiled at her made her blush. Alice cleared her throat, pulling out her phone. Do you have a number where I can reach you, in case I need some of that help you're offering? Lucas repeated the number, smiling the entire time. See you later, Alice. The way he said it almost sounded as if he was hopeful she would contact him again. Alice was tempted, but she knew she shouldn't. She had moved out to escape and live in solitude. The last thing she needed was to bring someone new into her inner circle, especially a man she barely knew. Alice was still dealing with the fact that her husband wanted to kill her. That continued to keep her awake at night, but at least here, in the middle of nowhere, it was easier to sleep. Some might think that would increase her anxiety, but it was the opposite, it made her feel safe. Putting as much distance as possible between her and João, with a guard posted outside the house, Alice knew she would be safe. The house really needed a lot of work, but Alice was happy about that. She wanted something that would keep her busy and distracted. That was the most important thing on her mind. Part of her was determined not to contact Lucas. He seemed like a nice guy who wanted to help, but he was taking care of his grandmother. She didn't want to pull him away from an elderly, vulnerable woman who needed his help. Alice was trying to avoid going into town at all costs, which meant she was relying heavily on deliveries. So, when a plumbing problem arose, she ordered the necessary parts and waited for the plumber to arrive. The parts arrived, but the plumber didn't. Reluctantly, she dialed Lucas's number, and he answered instantly. "Alice, I was just wondering when you'd call," he said with a soft laugh. "Hi, Lucas. Are you busy?" she asked. "No, not at all. Grandma is settled in the living room, having lunch, and she'll be napping in her chair soon. What do you need?" Alice explained the situation as best as she could. As soon as she finished, Lucas said he'd be over right away and hung up. Moments later he arrived, carrying a few tools. "Show me the way," Lucas said, smiling. The problem was resolved quickly. To thank him, Alice cooked something in her now functional kitchen and drove to his house. She felt a bit uneasy about showing up unannounced. Alice didn't even need to knock when, suddenly, Lucas opened the door. In a moment of panic, she raised the food she had packed in several containers. "I made something for you and your grandma to eat," she said, "and I just realized I never asked if either of you have any dietary restrictions." Lucas shook his head. "No, we don't. Thank goodness." He took the food and smiled. "Alice, this is very kind of you." "It's a thank you for fixing my plumbing so quickly," she said. "Would you like to come in and eat with us?" Alice hesitated. "No, she better come in and join us." Lucas's grandma called out, laughing from the other room. "Okay, I'll stay," Alice said, laughing. "No one can say no to Grandma," Lucas joked. Whenever Alice needed help, she would call Lucas. In return, she would bring him food, whether it was dinner or some dessert she had baked. Sometimes Alice would join them, but other times she wouldn't, as she needed to return home. It became clear to Alice after a few months that she was starting to like Lucas. This felt different from how she had felt when she thought she was falling in love with João. Back then it felt like something she had to do. He kept insisting, so why not give a chance to a guy who cared about her? But that wasn't right. Alice should have been firm, and João should have accepted her initial rejection as a final answer, not a negotiation. Lucas wasn't like that. He was simply a genuinely good person, not expecting anything in return. At no point did Lucas make any romantic gestures, so it was hard to tell if he felt anything like that for her. For all Alice knew, it could all be in her head, one-sided. She wanted to say something to make her feelings clear, but Alice decided to wait to make sure it was real. "Where did you learn to cook?" Lucas asked one night when she brought over some cookies to thank him for yet another job well done at the farm. "I actually taught myself," Alice admitted shyly. My dad worked a lot and I didn't like the food the nanny made, so I thought, why not make my own?" "That's very charming," Lucas said. Alice lowered her head, hoping he wouldn't notice that she was blushing. The last thing she wanted was for Lucas to see her blushing. "I was a very determined child." "Oh well, look where it got you." "CEO of a company," Lucas said. Alice bit her lower lip. Some people think I don't deserve the position because my dad used to be the head of the company. So I made sure to prove my worth. People will always judge you, even for the smallest things. The best thing you can do is stop letting people affect you. Easier said than done, I know, but I'll try, Alice replied. Lucas smiled. That's what matters. She was falling for him. It was getting to the point where Alice wanted to make her feelings for him clear, or at least make it obvious that she was interested. Some people don't realize when someone is trying to win them over. You either keep it subtle or you make it very clear. The problem was Alice was scared. She had opened her heart to someone once and it had nearly cost her her life. Speaking of João, she hadn't spoken to him since the last night she was at home. He kept reaching out to Bianca, each message more disturbed than the last. But Alice would keep moving forward. There was no way she would stay married to João. Why would Alice want to stay with someone who wanted her dead? It didn't make sense. She had more respect for herself than that, and more importantly, she didn't want to die, at least not that way. Alice knew she needed to take the first step with Lucas. She wanted to make her interest clear. If he rejected her, so be it, Alice would be fine with that. What mattered was that she was taking a risk. But those feelings took a back seat when Lucas reached out to her for help. Hey Alice, I hope I'm not bothering you. Not at all. Is something wrong? There's a sudden emergency in town and I don't want to leave Grandma alone because she's not feeling well. Could you stay with her for a while? Yes, Alice replied quickly. Lucas sighed in relief. Thank you, Alice. I'll be back soon. Lucas tried to thank her again, but Alice laughed and said she needed to go so she could arrive on time. She arrived within 10 minutes. As soon as she got there, Lucas left, leaving her with his grandma. Come sit down, Grandma said, smiling at her. I appreciate you coming to take care of me, but it wasn't necessary. All I had was a cold, which has already passed, but my dear Lucas worries too much. Honestly, I'm tired of being stuck in this house. An idea popped into Alice's mind. She smiled and turned to Grandma. How about we take a quick trip to my farm so you can see how it's coming along? Grandma's eyes sparkled with amusement. Oh, I'd love that. Let's go. Alice helped Grandma out of the house and into the car. Before leaving, Alice sent a message to Lucas, informing him that his grandma was at the farm. Part of Alice wondered if she was overstepping. What if he got upset with her for taking his grandma out when she was still recovering? Yes, Grandma had made it clear that she was feeling better, but this was Lucas's grandma, not hers. Despite these reservations, Alice continued on to the farm. The first time Grandma saw the place, she seemed so happy and a little emotional. She talked about how she remembered the last people who had lived there. It was good to see the farm slowly returning to its former glory. Yes, there was still a lot of work to be done, but it was getting there. The late afternoon sun slowly dipped, bathing the porch with its weathered wooden boards and faded rocking chairs in a warm, golden glow, a front row seat to this quiet spectacle. Grandma's voice was soft, but tinged with concern. Lucas has been my rock, you know? Since his parents passed, he's put his life on hold. He thinks he can't have a life of his own without neglecting me, she sighed, her hands fidgeting with the edges of her blanket. It's a kind thing, but it torments me. Alice nodded, her eyes following the flight of a solitary bird against the orange sky. He seems like a wonderful man, sacrificing so much. Yes, but at what cost? Grandma's eyebrows furrowed. He's young. He should be out there, finding someone special, building a life of his own. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I think he's scared, Alice. Scared that love will pull him away, and scared of getting hurt again. Eventually, Alice brought Grandma back home. It took no more than half an hour for Lucas to return. Hi, Alice said with a nervous smile. Before he could say anything, she continued, I'm sorry for overstepping my boundaries and taking your grandmother out. I hope you're not mad, but she seemed like she wanted to go out. Lucas blinked and raised his hand. Alice, you have nothing to apologize for. I realize I can be overprotective of my grandmother. The fact that you cared enough to take her out and spend time with her means a lot to me. She let out a sigh she didn't know she was holding. I'm so glad to hear you say that. All this time I thought I was crossing the line or something like that. He laughed. You worry too much, Alice. I do, she admitted with a weak laugh. Alice knew she needed to go home but wanted to finally get something off her chest. She cleared her throat and smiled at Lucas. You're getting ready to leave, he asked. Yes, but do you think we could talk for a moment outside on the porch? He nodded. Sure. As soon as they were on the porch, Alice felt her stomach start to churn. Lucas, I've grown very fond of you over the past few months, and I want you to know that. It's something I needed to get off my chest, even if you don't feel the same way. If you don't, I understand, but I want you to know that I can't stop thinking about you. Lucas didn't say anything. Alice began to fear the worst, but then he smiled softly. I must be the most oblivious man in the world because I had no idea, he admitted. All this time I convinced myself that you couldn't possibly feel the same way, so I just decided to suppress those feelings. Alice leaned in, closing the distance between them, and placed her lips over his. He was surprised at first, but then he wrapped his arms around her waist, holding her close. When they pulled apart, they both smiled at each other. Oh well, that was a pleasant surprise, Grandma laughed from inside. It was about time you two did something, she said. I was starting to think I'd have to play matchmaker. Both laughed heartily. So, would you like to come to dinner tomorrow? Alice asked with a smile. I understand that you have your grandmother to think about. I'll be fine, Grandma shouted from inside. Lucas, go to dinner. Lucas shook his head in disbelief. Yes, I'd love to. Can I come around 7? That sounds great, Alice replied. From then on, a romance began to blossom between them. Alice was nervous, trying not to make mistakes, but she also wanted to be sure she wasn't rushing things. When João finally signed the divorce papers, Alice sat down with Lucas and decided it was time to explain the situation to him. He looked shocked to learn that João had planned her murder so blatantly and was furious that João had essentially gotten away with it. I've made peace with it, Lucas, she said. Lucas swallowed hard. Well, as long as I'm around, he won't lay a finger on you if he decides to show up. That wasn't a promise, it was a threat. Alice's heart started to race seeing how much he was willing to do to protect her. I love you, Alice said impulsively. She froze, realizing what she had just said. The romance between them had only been going on for about 3 months. Alice couldn't believe she had said it out loud, it seemed too soon. She was convinced she had ruined everything between them. I love you too, Lucas confessed, his cheeks flushed. She closed the distance between them and kissed him. They simply held each other on the couch, enjoying each other's presence for a while. When Grandma learned how serious the relationship had become, she said she was happy for them. The elderly woman was radiant with joy, obviously delighted that her only grandson had found someone. Alice had a brief moment of thinking she wasn't good enough for Lucas due to her infertility, but Lucas dismissed her concerns. There are other things we can do if we ever reach the point of wanting children, he said with a smile. We can adopt or use a surrogate. Being parents while I'm with you is what matters. That was enough to make Alice cry with happiness. It was everything she had always wanted to hear. Lucas never made her feel that she needed to apologize for her inability to have children. Nature had made her that way, and it wasn't anyone's fault. Alice was at a point in her relationship where everything felt perfect. She couldn't stop falling in love with Lucas even if she tried. He was different from anyone she had ever met. Although they were still in a fragile phase and eventually the honeymoon period would end, this didn't seem like a bad thing. It would give her more clarity about the whole relationship, unlike João, where she felt something was very wrong between them. Once the honeymoon phase ended, all she could do was hope that everything would work out, which she was pretty sure it would. But as they say, all good things must come to an end. Alice never thought she would see João again. She thought he would stay away from her, especially after the divorce was finalized. However, he was more foolish than she had thought, because one day, while she was working on something inside the house, a familiar car entered her garage. Her heart began to race. Lucas was upstairs working on a problem in the bathroom. Maybe if she went out and talked to João, she could get him to leave without causing any trouble. With her heart pounding, Alice stepped outside. "Alice!" João shouted, running towards her. "I can't believe I finally found you. Do you know how long I've been searching for you?" "Yes," Alice replied coldly. "My lawyer, Bianca, kept me updated." João smiled awkwardly. "Alice, I know I signed the divorce papers, but I only did it because I didn't want to prolong things for you. I still love you and want to make this work." "Are you kidding me, João? Why would I come here knowing all the terrible things you did to me and beg for your forgiveness?" Alice swallowed hard. "I know you wanted to get rid of me." João blinked. "A what?" "I heard you and your parents talking about getting rid of me. You said that the cruise would be a great way to make my death look like an accident." Suddenly, João's face changed to something that made Alice step back. "Alice, don't be silly. We weren't serious. I was just trying to please my parents. But I assure you, I would never hurt you. I apologize for the betrayal, but I won't apologize for anything else." "I don't want your apologies, João. What you need to do is leave and stay off my property." He narrowed his eyes. "I'm not going anywhere." "Alice." Lucas called from the porch. "Who's here?" She choked, glancing over her shoulder. "Lucas, this is my ex-husband, João." "João, this is Lucas." Lucas walked over and shook João's hand firmly. "I'm the boyfriend," he said simply. Alice watched as Lucas held João's hand in a grip that must have been painful, as João's face twisted in discomfort. Between the handshake and the look in Lucas's eyes, João looked scared and tried to pull his hand away several times before Lucas finally released it. Lucas smiled, hugging Alice. "I trust we won't see each other again." João looked down. "No, we won't. I just wanted to make sure Alice was happy." "You can see that she is," Lucas said with a smile. "So you better leave." Alice had never seen her ex-husband move so quickly. He practically ran back to his car and drove away. "I really feel like I saw him for the last time," she said. "If he knows what's good for him, he won't come back to bother you," Lucas warned. She pulled Lucas into a kiss, savoring the love that radiated from him. "I love you." He laughed. "I love you too, Alice." It took a long time for Alice to find true happiness, but now that she had, she wasn't going to let it slip away for any reason. She would cherish it for the rest of her life. Shortly after, Lucas proposed to her. It was a simple but profoundly sincere moment, surrounded by the natural beauty of the countryside near their home. Alice, overwhelmed with emotion, accepted with tears of joy streaming down her face. The wedding, held a few months later, was a warm celebration with close friends and family, filled with laughter, dancing, and the promise of a future full of love and companionship. A few months later, it was a special day for the family, although Alice didn't yet know just how special it would be. Lucas, already awake and radiant with anticipation, gently woke her with a kiss on the forehead. "A good morning, my love," Lucas whispered, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "Get dressed, I have a surprise for you." Alice, still groggy from sleep, smiled and stretched. "A surprise on a day like this?" "Yes, and trust me, you're going to love it," Lucas assured her, his voice full of warmth that calmed her. For the day, they drove to the city under the clear blue sky, with the fresh air promising new beginnings. Lucas held her hand throughout the journey, a silent assurance that no matter what the day brought, they would be together. When they stopped in front of a charming office adorned with cheerful flowers, Alice looked at Lucas with a question in her eyes. "We're here to see someone very special," Lucas explained, squeezing her hand. "An adoption specialist." The words hit Alice like a gentle, overwhelming wave, but full of relief. Tears welled up in her eyes as the weight of her unspoken hopes and hidden fears found recognition. She hugged Lucas tightly, her heart overflowing with gratitude for his understanding and love. "Thank you," she whispered into his shoulder. "This means everything to me." The meeting with the specialist was warm and informative, filling them with hope and enthusiasm for the future. However, as they were deeply engaged in discussing the possibilities, Alice suddenly felt a wave of nausea. Apologizing, she ran to the bathroom, leaving a concerned Lucas behind. After a few tense minutes, Alice emerged, pale but trying to smile. "Sorry, I think I ate something bad," she murmured, leaning into Lucas for support. "It's okay, my love," Lucas said, his eyebrows furrowed with concern. "Let's get you home." In the days that followed, Alice's mysterious illness persisted. Grandma, always observant and wise, finally spoke one morning after witnessing Alice's struggle once more. "Alice, dear, this reminds me of mornings decades ago," Grandma said gently, with a knowing look in her eyes. "I think you might be pregnant." Alice felt her heart race. Pregnant? The idea seemed so distant, almost impossible. But as reality began to settle in, a mix of joy and disbelief sparkled in her eyes. Could life really be opening this new door just when they thought all others were closed? The thought was overwhelming, a miraculous twist in their journey, leading them down an unexpected, yet hopeful path. Against all odds and previous diagnoses, Alice discovered she was carrying a new life within her. Despite being considered infertile, she and Lucas experienced the joy and wonder of pregnancy, a journey that filled them both with deep reverence and gratitude. Months later, they welcomed baby Mateus into the world. His arrival marked the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, a chapter filled with love, discoveries, and endless possibilities, where each day was a new celebration of the miracle that brought them even closer together.
And if you liked this video, subscribe to the channel, like, comment, and share this story.